Since I'm due with my second child at the end of July this season, I know I'm going to need to rest a little bit more in the garden this season. Regardless of your situation, it's important to take that time to enjoy the work that you've put into your garden. Also, it's important to create places for people to enjoy your garden as well. Today we're going to share with you a quick and easy idea to add a garden bench that also incorporates another opportunity to plant a few more plants. In order to build this bench, we're going to of course need something to sit on. So we're going to start with some 2 by 6 by 8 foot long boards. And then we're going to use about 22 concrete blocks. Now, of course, you could use more or less depending on the pattern that you want to use. But for the pattern we're doing today, you're going to need 22 concrete blocks. In order to make sure that one side of the bench is square with the other side of the bench so that your boards line up, we're going to need a square, some wood stakes, a mallet, and then also some string. Now, once we have our concrete blocks in place, we're going to fill those with plants. And in order to hold those plants in place, we're going to use some expanded metal that is often used for stucco, so you can find this at your hardware store, some landscape fabric, and then also some metal flashing. And we're going to use all of that, and we're going to need some adhesive, concrete adhesive, in order to keep that in place. Of course, we need our tape measure, and then last but not least, a good pair of gloves to move those concrete blocks. You can see here we've got our first 4 blocks laid out already, and these are kind of the most important ones to kind of establish in your placement. So what we've done is we've squared up with these stakes to make sure that each side of the bench will be perfectly parallel, and also that we're 50 inches apart. At that point, what we've done is we laid one of our boards across here and used a level to make sure that both sides are also level with one another and that our bricks are level. So we've got a few more bricks that we're going to lay on this first level, but we've got our first 4 established. So we're finishing off our second layer here, and you can see we've added 5 more blocks on top of our first layer. Now, what we tried to do was to overlap as many of those bricks as possible, just to get a little more security. We do have 2 here that you can see overlap nothing, and so they're actually kind of floating in space, and these can be a little precarious as far as getting them to stay there. You might have to push them just a little bit in, but eventually this next layer is going to help lock these 2 in. In the meantime, we're going to level and make sure that this second layer is level. If our first layer was level, the second layer should be level, which it seems to be. We'll check it in a couple of different ways just to make sure. So that looks good. And now with this second layer, we've actually reached a height of about 15 inches, which is close to our bench height that we're aiming for. So we're ready to add our 2 by 6 boards. So at this point, we've got our boards on here, and we're going to help balance those overlapping blocks by placing this block right on top of these boards. So this kind of really locks everything into place again. In the meantime, we've got a nice bench to work on here. Now, we did buy treated lumber because obviously this is a bench that's going to be out exposed to the elements. But because we're going to plant all of these holes here, including these 2 on top, there's going to be a lot of moisture sitting right on this particular area. We want to make sure to put some metal flashing just to give a little more protection and to protect it from that moisture that'll be sitting in there. We want to outline our brick with landscape adhesive in order to get our metal sheeting to stick to the concrete block. We've already cut our metal sheeting to match the width and length of our block here. So it's just a matter of pressing this down on there, smoothing it out a little bit. And in fact, at this point, we're going to go ahead and flip this over because the weight of our block will help keep that metal flashing in place. And then we're just going to repeat the process for the other side. Now, in order to plant all of our concrete blocks, we need something to hold the soil in those blocks. And of course, the ones that are over the open air, we definitely need something to hold that soil. So we're going to create these baskets out of expanded metal. Again, that's often used for stucco and stuff. You definitely want to make sure you're wearing gloves when you're working with this, because it can snag your skin pretty easily. So we've created about a 19-inch across plus sign. And it's a little bit of trial and error, but this seems to be about the measurement we work. The other thing, you want to cut out a little bit on the corners here, because when you push that down in, it tends to bunch up a little bit there and make it hard to push into those blocks. So we're just going to fold each of these sides up, and then that creates our basket, basically like that. And you can see we've got another one here. So we're going to have to create about 16 of these in order to fill all of our holes. So we're going to push this down into our block, kind of make a fist. Again, being careful. Might even break out your rose pruning gloves to protect your arms even more. Push that down in there until it's smooth with the top of the brick so that you don't snag your skin when you're planting. And just to secure this a little bit more, we're going to use some of that concrete landscape adhesive to hold it in there. You might use some piece of wood to kind of push it into that glue a little bit better. Now, of course, this needs to dry, but once it dries, the mesh is actually going to hold the weight of our plant and our soil. But what's going to actually hold our soil in that mesh basket is our landscape fabric. So we'll line this mesh basket with landscape fabric, again, after that adhesive dries. So we've got our metal baskets glued into each one of our concrete blocks, although we didn't put metal baskets in here because it didn't really need to be reinforced because we've got the boards underneath this. We then lined each of the baskets, and including these up here, with some landscape fabric. Because while the baskets will hold the weight of the plant and the soil, it's actually going to be the fabric that holds the soil in the block. So we've chosen this time to use a thinner landscape fabric intentionally. We've got, there's a thick one that we often use, but we chose the thin one because it actually folds up a little bit better and is easier to work in that smaller space. So we've got that in there, and you can still see it's showing. We know it's showing, but what we're going to do is finish planting all of our plants before we go back and cut any overlap of that liner that's still hanging out. Now, some of the plants that we've selected for our bench here, we intentionally looked for plants that were drought tolerant, that might add a little color, such as our lantana, some trailing plants, such as the licorice plant and the secretia. We've also got some ice plant here that should do really well in the drought conditions. And then because people are sitting here, we want to make sure that they experience the garden, not just with their eyes, but they actually can smell it too. So we've got some thyme and some lavender, some rosemary and sage that we've incorporated as well. So, as you're sitting down, you tend to touch some plants and things like that. And so hopefully you get a nice whiff of those fragrances also. So the other thing is, I know a lot of times we think bigger is better with plants, but in this case, because we're working with such small pockets to plant in, we've really gone with smaller plants so that we can put more in each one of those. So you can see here, the most we've got are a couple of little 3-inch pots, some little pints, and maybe some 4-inch, but you don't want to use 1 gallons because those are going to be too big to really get into this space. So we have a good collection of plants here that will continue to grow all season long and really give us a beautiful, colorful garden. We went ahead and planted everything and watered it all really well before we went back and trimmed the liner. That way, in case there was any, pull down effect or anything like that, we still made sure that we had plenty of landscape fabric to hold that soil in. And also, when we planted these, we wanted to make sure that the soil wasn't flush with the block, because when we water it, we want to make sure that the soil remains in that block. So we've got it all planted. Again, we've used some plants that might act more like the thriller. They're upright, they're tall, and then we've got some spillers that are going to flow over and soften these concrete blocks. Really, the nice thing about this project is you can do it in a couple of hours. It didn't require any carpentry work or anything. The boards are the same size that we bought them. And the only cutting required was to make those mesh baskets and also to put the landscape fabric in. This is an easy weekend project that'll allow you to sit back and enjoy your garden.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.